The Pink Diamond, The Curse of Blood. A moonless night. On a night when the sky was tightly closed, with no trace of moonlight, the sound of rain wasn't unusual for Bangkok. But on certain nights, the rain seemed to fall, not just on the streets but also onto someone's heart, heavy and relentless. It was like a warning of something about to unfold. The usually lively Sukhumvit area felt strangely cold. Though it was just the start of the rainy season, the wind was unusually, leaves rustled wildly as if trying to chase something away from this place. In an old yet elegant mansion, the front door creaked open slowly. The sound wasn't the creak of wood, but rather the sound of a secret being unlocked once more. Inside, a young woman lay in the bathtub. Her skin was pale as paper, her eyes frozen in a gaze toward the ceiling, and her lips curved into a faint smile. The final smile before breath was lost. There were no signs of struggle, no screams, no evidence of a violent death. Yet everything in that room spoke of a death that wasn't ordinary. On her hand was a ring, a large, meticulously cut pink diamond, vivid as crystallized blood. But it wasn't an ordinary diamond. Many years ago, the legend of the pink diamond was whispered among only the highest circles of collectors. It had once been a pure white diamond, unearthed from a deep mine on a distant continent. It bore notes in purity, seemed to attract something dark. Only days after its discovery, the mine's owner was found dead in his private tent, his throat precisely cut. There were no signs of intrusion, only a smear of blood, and the diamond resting on his chest. The diamond passed to another collector who died exactly 42 days later, and then another. Everyone who possessed the diamond met their death within a similar time frame, and each time the diamond's color deepened, from clear white to pale red, then darker until it became the vivid pink seen today. Detective Ryan stood silently in the mansion's bathroom, staring at the ring. Everyone on his team knew he wasn't a believer in the supernatural, but in his eyes now, there was uncertainty. This was the 14th case, the 14th woman dead, with the same diamond ring in her possession. She wasn't wealthy, she had no enemies, no debts, and crucially, there was no reason she should have had a diamond of such global value in her home. Security footage from an hour before the incident was erased, and at the doorstep lay a black wooden box tied with red ribbon, holding a card written in blood-colored ink. When pure beauty meets blood, the truth will reveal itself. In another part of the city, in a small rented room, a man sat among piles of old documents. No one knew his real name. He had no ID, no credit record, or not even a citizen's card. In certain circles, he was only known as Shadow. He was once a detective who disappeared 7 years ago in a case tied to this very pink diamond. In a journal buried under files, he had written, "Everyone who died had the same blood type, AB, Aj, and in every case, no one knows who the ring sender is. But if it happens again, it means I failed to stop it." He looked up at the dim ceiling light. His hand trembled slightly as he held another ring, identical to the victim's. But his was not yet pink. "This time I will end it." His voice was soft, like a vow from someone who didn't exist in this world. And in the shadows of the rain-soaked night, someone was watching him through a camera lens from the building opposite. With a faint smile and a whispered voice no one could hear, "The 15th ring is about to begin," the shadow vanishing in a mirror. The rain on the following night wasn't as heavy as before, but a suffocating tension still hung in the air, like a thin mist that refused to fade. In a crumbling apartment on the fifth floor with no elevator, Shadow sat slumped against the window. His figure seemed more fragile than before, not because of age, but because something from the past still haunted him. The worn wooden table was cluttered with old files, hacked security camera CDs, and photographs of the victims, 14 women and 1 man. He picked up a ring. The diamond still gleamed in a clear, icy white, less vivid than the pink diamond others had seen, but he knew it was the same ring that had once been white as ice, a ring that should never be possessed again. Once he had been an undercover cop on a special investigation team. The cursed diamond case had changed his life forever. 7 years ago, the sixth victim was his own wife. The woman he loved most, Lena, was found in their bedroom wearing a ring he'd never seen before. There were no signs of struggle, no wounds, but her heart had inexplicably stopped. He was suspected, but the evidence was insufficient. The case was quietly shelved. His wife's name never appeared in any official record, as though she had never truly existed. From that day forward, he disappeared from the system, fading into shadow, and he waited for the day it would return. "It's back," he murmured. On the screen, the security footage from the most recent victim's house, the woman in the bathtub, was magnified frame by frame. Just before the missing 1 hour gap, the camera caught a fleeting image. Not a person, not a physical body, but a shadow that didn't reflect in the mirror, while the opposing camera showed a reflection of an empty room. The shadow remained. He paused the frame, zoomed in, and his heartbeat quickened inexplicably. In the shadow's hand was a black wooden box, tied with a red ribbon. He instantly realized the one sending the diamond to the victims wasn't anyone from this world he knew, and this diamond ring wasn't just an object, it was a link, a bridge between the world we see and something lurking in the shadows. Elsewhere in the city, Detective Ryan was beginning to notice abnormalities. The autopsy of the young woman revealed no toxins, no wounds, not even internal signs of organ failure. But what shocked everyone was, under the microscope, the concentration of red blood cells in her body had vanished. It was as if her blood had been slowly drained away. But there were no wounds, no punctures. The forensic doctor was so shaken that he dared not record what he had seen in the official report. That same night, Shadow received a letter, no sender's name. The envelope bore a single seal, a diamond split down the middle, with blood flowing from the crack. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in faded ink. "When the time of the 15th ring comes, the watcher will turn back, and the curse will become an awakening." He didn't know what it meant, but the words 15th ring sent a cold shiver through his body, because if he counted the woman in the bathtub, she was the 14th victim. And if no one stopped it, the 15th victim. The shadow no one sees. The alarm clock buzzed precisely on time in the silent room, but no one moved to stop it. Shadow was already awake before it rang. He lay on the creaky old bed in his cheap rented room, eyes wide open. He had dreamt of the black wooden box again, the box that had appeared outside his home 7 years ago and took everything away from his life. Today wasn't a day to chase a murderer. Today was a day he would start chasing something that didn't exist, something that appeared on security footage but had no place in the real world. He spread out files organized by year and event. Only a few people in the world had seen all the images of the 14 victims, and he was one of them. But as he stared at those photos once more in the morning light, he noticed a tiny detail. The eyes of every victim, they weren't looking at the camera or the ceiling. Their gaze was slightly shifted upward to the right, as if they had seen something just before they died. Something even he had yet to see. He picked up his cigarette case, opening it slowly. Inside, there were no cigarettes, only a piece of faded paper folded with care. It was Lena's notebook, his wife's journal. In her final entries just days before her death, she described recurring dreams. In those dreams, she was in a windowless room filled with mirrors, and she saw herself. But the reflection wasn't her. It smiled at her before everything went dark. If it wasn't just a trick of the eye, there must be something in the house. He decided to return to the crime scene of the 14th victim, the old Suchumvit mansion. He didn't ask for permission, didn't bring police gear, and had no backup. Just a forged note with the owner's signature and an old leather bag he always used on solo investigation. He re-entered the bathroom. The bathtub felt icy to the touch even after all these days. Beside it was an old wall mirror. He looked at his reflection, then tilted his head in the same direction the victim's eyes had been captured gazing. There, in the corner of the wall, was something off. He pulled out a pocket knife from his bag, tapping lightly against the wall. A hollow sound. A hidden compartment, he murmured. He carefully pried it open to reveal a small picture frame tucked inside. It was a watercolor painting of a young woman, beautiful with strangely sorrowful eyes. Beneath the frame, handwritten words read, "Don't look into what reflects. If you're not sure, it's really you." Shadow held the frame for a long while before placing it in his bag. He knew then this wasn't just a curse. It was a message from someone playing with the shadows of humanity, not with dark magic, but with knowledge, expertise, and a chilling precision. That same evening, Detective Ryan met with the former maid of the mansion. She was nearly 70, but still remembered the house's old owner well. "Mr. Wada was an artist," she said. "He painted the same woman's face his entire life." Ryan asked, "Who was the woman in those paintings?" The maid fell silent for a moment, then softly replied, "His wife. She drowned in the bathtub 30 years ago. After that, he never painted anything else." Paintings with no names. An old city bus rattled down Sukhumvit Road, as if telling forgotten stories of a past Bangkok. On the pavement outside a tiny gallery, dry rain left crusty patterns on the cracked concrete. This was the art gallery of the Pater Wada, a man the art world had long forgotten. Shadow stepped into the nearly empty shop. The walls were filled with soft watercolor portraits. Almost all were of the same woman's face, from different angles and expressions. The woman in those portraits was the same face from the small frame he had found behind the mansion's wall. "What do you want from his paintings?" the elderly shopkeeper asked. She wasn't particularly friendly, her expression guarded and hesitant to speak of the past. I'm searching for the shadow. In the images he left behind, Shadow replied calmly, Then you've come to the right place. But it might be too late. She pulled a key from a drawer, unlocked a cabinet, and retrieved a faded brown file folder. Its cover was handwritten with the title, Palin, the Shadow That Vanished. Inside were only a few pages, a small sketchbook telling the story of Palin, the woman who had been both Wada's wife and muse. He had painted her repeatedly throughout their short 3-year marriage. But one day she vanished into the bathtub with no body, no explanation. He became a man without a smile, endlessly painting her in increasingly repetitive poses, as though trying to remember something he had forgotten. Shadow turned to the last page of the folder. There was just one painting, a watercolor of Palin standing before a mirror, but in the reflection she wasn't there. Instead, the mirror reflected Wada, and in the lower corner of the painting, written in tiny pencil letters, She didn't choose the diamond, but he painted it into the shadow. That phrase sparked something in Shadow's mind. The diamond wasn't given, it was placed into the image, a symbol, a trap set by human hands, by someone who deeply understood the human psyche and their shadows. An artist who once loved and lost. And where is he now? Shadow asked quietly. The elderly shopkeeper fell silent for a moment, then softly said, He's dead, but not in the way you think. Shadow frowned. He died on the same day his wife disappeared. After that, his body remained, but his essence vanished with her. As he left the shop, the soft evening sunlight filtered through the bamboo curtains. He took the final painting with him, the one where the shadow didn't match the figure, and suddenly he remembered something. In the case files from the most recent murders, every victim's house had at least one mirror that didn't reflect anything when photographed. These weren't ordinary mirrors. They were carefully positioned images designed to erase something, not a demon, not a hallucination, but the work of someone who knew exactly how to deceive the human eye. Like an artist creating an image from half-truths. Back at his apartment, Shadow pulled out a note tucked beneath the mirror on his vanity. It read, Don't seek the shadow if you're not sure it's really yours. The conditions of being chosen. He didn't believe in fate, curses, or the idea that a diamond could choose anyone on its own. If each victim died for the same reason, then someone must have been the one choosing them. The question was, choosing them based on what? Shadow began his investigation with victim no. 1, a 24-year-old former private librarian. He visited the small library in Bangrak, now a converted coffee shop. The new owner said that Pam was quiet, kept to herself, and on her last day, she received a birthday gift from an anonymous sender. The giver claimed to be a former co-worker, but no name, no contact information was left. The gift was a clear diamond ring which turned pink after her death. Victim No. 2, a PhD scholar in art history. Shadow visited the university where she used to teach part-time. A professor mentioned she was obsessed with classical art and believed that every artwork hid a code invisible to the average eye. The day before she died, she told a friend, I think I've cracked it. There's something in the mirrors reflecting the answer. Victim No. 3. A housemaid who won a diamond ring in a department store raffle. Shadow tracked down the event manager that day, but the paperwork listed the organizer as a closed corporation with no traceable records. Security footage couldn't determine who placed the prize in the box, and strangely, the winner's name had been entered into the system 2 days before the event began. Victim 206, his own wife, Lena. She had no knowledge of diamonds, no interest in jewelry, and never asked for anything. But that day, she told him she found the ring in a drawer he couldn't remember ever owning. Back in his own room, amid stacks of files and notes piling up like a mountain, Shadow revisited the data. 14 women, ages between 22 and 35, different professions, no social connections. But each one had a unique ability that ordinary people didn't. Some understood hidden systems in images. Some could analyze human behavior from body language. Some were designers for high-end global brands. Some were translators of ancient texts. And some simply said, "I looked into the mirror and felt it wasn't me." Shadow began connecting the dots on his wall of photos. He didn't look at gender, didn't consider their jobs. He focused on one thing. They saw what others couldn't. In the file for victim no. 9, he found a psychiatrist's therapy notes. The doctor had written, "The patient exhibited strange beliefs that her shadow changed poses without her moving." And another note, believed the mirror in her room was abnormal. She couldn't tell which side of the reflection she was on. He stood before the only mirror in his room. Under the dim yellow glow of a neon bulb, he studied his own reflection and jotted down his observations. The light angles didn't align with the shadow on his shoulder. The eyes in the reflection stared straight ahead, even though he tilted his head slightly. A thin nail crack from this morning wasn't visible in the reflection. Slowly, he pulled an old film camera from a wooden box under the bed. Not digital, not modern technology, but old eyes, untainted by intermediaries of technology. He would photograph the mirror's reflection using natural light and wait for the image to develop on film to determine whether it was a true shadow or a picture someone had drawn instead. Because now he was starting to believe the victims weren't chosen by fate. They were chosen because they saw something they weren't supposed to see. Women whom the ring rejected. That night in Bangkok, there was no rain, no wind, not even the sound of cars, only silence, and what some might call unease. Chada walked along a narrow alley in Bang Khon From, an old neighborhood frozen in time from 30 years ago. He stopped in front of a quiet house. The dark brown wooden door was shut tight, but a warm light filtered through the curtain inside. The woman who lived here was Sachada, the only woman on record who had received the diamond ring box but was still alive. Shada didn't give his name. He simply showed her a photo of the ring and the latest victim. Chachada was calm, not surprised, and didn't deny it. She invited him inside, her expression saying she had been waiting for someone to ask about this for a long time. "That day, I didn't open the box myself," she said. "The box was left in front of my house when I got home from work. I don't know where it came from." "And what did you do?" Shada asked quietly. "I opened it." She hesitated. "It was beautiful. The diamond was so clear I could see myself in it, clearer than any mirror." "And did you wear it?" Suchada was silent for a long time before she softly said, "Yes." "And then what happened?" She looked out the window. The shadow of leaves danced on the curtain like a person passing by. "That night I dreamt I dreamt I was in a room with no walls, just mirrors surrounding me. I searched for an exit, but every mirror reflected myself, standing alone. But in one of them, I wasn't smiling. I touched my cheek, but the reflection didn't follow. I woke up the next morning with a scratch on my left cheek and the ring in the drawer. Even though I hadn't taken it off, Shadow remained silent, jotting down every word. Then he asked slowly, "Did you tell anyone about this?" She shook her head. "Never, because after that day, I began to forget little by little. Like, I can't remember when I graduated. I can't remember what day my mother died, but I remember everything I saw in the mirror that night." Shadow opened his notebook and showed her a drawing of Pelin, the wife of Wada. Suchara looked at the drawing, then hesitantly said, "The woman in my mirror looked a lot like her." Shadow met her gaze. "Have you seen this picture before?" "I'm not sure, but she looks like someone I once knew when I was a child. Or maybe she was a teacher I once had, but I can't remember her name at all." Shadow instantly realized that Sachado's memories hadn't faded naturally. They had been replaced by something connected to the diamond, to the shadow in the mirror, and to the past of someone she had never known before. Before leaving the house, she handed him a brown envelope. "The day after the dream, I found this in my mailbox. No return address, no stamp." Shada opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You're not meant for it. You see too much, but not deep enough. You'll be given the chance to forget. If you don't, you'll have to remember everything." Shada pocketed the letter. Suchada stopped him at the door. "Do you think I should forget, or should I remember?" Shadow looked into her eyes with a calm gaze. "Those who forget often survive, but never know what they've survived. But those who remember often suffer, but will never be swallowed." He stepped out of the house and walked through the unchanged silence of the alley. But inside him, something had shifted. Because now he was certain of one thing: the victims weren't chosen, they were tested. And Sachada was the one who failed but lived. The question was, why? The old photograph in the empty classroom. The next morning, the sky over Bangkok was dark and overcast without rain. Shadow boarded the old train line and traveled to a private girls' school on the city's outskirts. This was the school Suchada attended 20 years ago, and if her memories had been altered, old photos might be the evidence that remained untouched. The school hadn't changed much. The old wooden buildings were still there, their paint faded with time. The school sign, hand-painted, was missing some letters. The back office was cluttered with files, documents, and student photos sorted by year. Shadow requested to see the files for class of 2004, the year Sachada was in grade 8. The staff eyed him suspiciously, but after he presented forged authorization papers, they sighed and led him to the archive cabinets. A file was pulled out. A group photo of girls in navy uniforms lined up in a classroom. Shadow sat quietly, carefully flipping through each page, and then he found it: Suchada, seated in the front row, beside another girl who had no name under the photo. That girl's face closely resembled Palin, but much younger. No name recorded, no matching student records for that year, as if she had been there, but never existed in the system. Shadow flipped through other class photos. He noticed the same girl appearing in several activities, art club, library duty, school plays, but in none of the photos was she looking directly at the camera. In every image, her head was slightly turned away, and the shadows on her face appeared faint and blurred, like someone who wasn't meant to be remembered. In one of the rarest photos, the end of year picture, there was a lone male figure standing among the girls. That man was the art instructor, white shirt sleeves rolled up, face calm, and those eyes. Shadow recognized them. He went to the school's registration office and asked for the art teacher's name from 2004. The staff said there wasn't a full-time art teacher that year, but there had been a volunteer instructor for a few months who disappeared without a trace. No records, no employment files. The only thing left was a student's sketchbook used during his classes, stored away in a cabinet untouched for over a decade. Shadow flipped to the final page of the sketchbook. A message was handwritten, clearly not by a child. A drawing is not about seeing, it's about choosing. The light within the shadow will reveal the worthy, not the willing. Beneath the sentence was a small symbol, a pentagon cut down with an inverted shadow reflection. Shadow was now certain the man was the one setting the conditions for selection, not the owner of the diamond, but the examiner. He appeared in the victim's pasts in quiet ways. For some, he was a teacher, for others, an event organizer, for others still, a stranger handing over a box in a mall. On his way home, Shadow took out the photo of Sushara and the nameless girl to examine again. He noticed something he had missed before. The girl's hair appeared paler than the others. Her eyes weren't looking at the camera but rather staring at someone behind the lens, someone who was there but wasn't captured. Back in his room, Shadow turned over the photo again. Faint handwriting, only visible now under the soft filament bulb light. Circle 0 never dies, because she is the beginning. The silence in his small apartment wasn't from the absence of sound. It was the silence of a current moving beneath the stillness, like an underwater ripple flowing slowly beneath a frozen surface. He sat before the old photo he had just uncovered. A girl with no name, no record, no mention in any system. But the message on the back was clear. Sarkozy is the beginning. He sat there for hours until the light outside his window faded. Then he retrieved an old vinyl record from the Wada gallery. A record no one had ever played because no one knew whose voice it held. A faint voice emerged through the needle of the record player. A woman's voice, not trembling, not sad, not angry, but calm. If you're listening to this recording, it means you've begun to see what I saw. And if you intend to understand what I did, ask yourself first, what do you see in the shadow? The diamond is not a curse. It never was. It's merely a tool to reveal who's ready to see and who should stop right there. Shadow paused the needle, jotting the words down. He didn't know who this woman was, but her voice changed the atmosphere, not because of emotion, but because of a tone of understanding deeper than reason. He thought back to all the victims. They didn't die because they wore the ring. They died after seeing something the ring reflected back. And among them all, there was only one who had seen it since childhood, the girl in the photo. Circle 0. Shadow decided to travel to Wada's hometown, Ratchaburi. a place no one had mentioned, but the only place he hadn't yet visited. He didn't believe the man's story began in Bangkok, a small temple set quietly on a hillside. Here Pauline had studied during high school before her disappearance. An elderly monk was the only one who remembered her name. The girl who didn't like her own shadow, he said. She drew pictures every day, but never of herself. Never let anyone photograph her. Never stood before a mirror, as if she was afraid that if she saw her reflection, she'd encounter someone she was trying to forget. Shadow asked, "When did she leave?" The monk closed his eyes, then reached for an old ledger. That year, something strange happened. One night, a man's shadow appeared at the temple gate. He stood there silently for a long time. The next day, the girl disappeared from her dormitory and no one ever saw her again. In the temple storage, Shadow found a sketchbook signed by Palin. The final page was a drawing of a diamond, rendered with lifelike detail. But inside the diamond was an image of a woman sitting in the shadows, her back turned. And beneath the drawing, a note read, "She doesn't seek the light. She only wants a small, overlooked space to hide a truth that shouldn't be spoken." Shadow stopped reading there because he finally understood. Circle Zero hadn't gone anywhere. She hadn't died, she had become part of the selection system. Not a victim, but the watcher, the one who observed, who saw what wasn't meant to be seen. He looked up at the twilight sky. That day there was no sun, only a faint light reflecting his shadow on the shadow window. But within that shadow he saw another shadow, standing behind him, still, unblinking, but there. The examiner. The morning breeze wasn't cold, but it carried a lingering sense of something unresolved. Shadow returned to his apartment with Palin's sketchbook and the old school photo. He spread everything across the floor. The 14 victims, the ring delivery patterns, the final words, each victim's special skill, and their dreams. Not all of them dreamed, but in 9 cases, there was a recurring pattern. The mirror didn't reflect as usual, the sense of being in a place unseen, and another pair of eyes in the shadow. He began writing on his wall with red chalk what connected them all. Each had a special skill or uncommon perception. Each received a ring from a person with no identity. Each noticed something wrong with shadows of mirrors before dying. No evidence of struggle, intrusion, or poison. Some received cryptic notes after the ring appeared. Back then, they had been observed beforehand. Watched, assessed, and selected. He named this person in his mind the examiner. Not a killer, but the hand that turned the wheel. The one tasked with watching who was ready to see, then sending the ring. Shadow retraced the clues everyone had overlooked. The black wooden box, from records kept by families of 5 victims. Every box was identical, as if produced by the same machine. He dismantled one from case 3. Beneath the box base, he found a faint, hidden slip of paper. When pulled free, the words were nearly faded. Examiner, Generation 4, Bangkok region. Test confirmation, 14 cases / pass 0, Generation 4. Shadow understood. This wasn't one person. It wasn't about emotions or revenge. It was a system with levels. A sender of the ring, an observer of results, a recorder, and above them, the one who had never been revealed. Circle Zero, either just a watcher or perhaps the system's creator. But the examiner was the one acting in the real world. He tracked down the owner of the wood workshop that had produced the diamond ring boxes. There he met an elderly man who had once crafted boxes for an unnamed company 15 years ago. When Shadow showed him a photo of the box, the man froze. "I used to make these boxes, but I didn't work alone." There was another man. He oversaw everything, designed the carvings, cut the sizes. But no one knew his name. We call him the teacher. Everyone who worked for him was forbidden to ask about the contents. We were never allowed to touch anything except the wood. He would arrive quietly, dressed in a suit, spoke little. He had a faint scar on his right wrist. Shadow pulled out the old photo of the art teacher from over a decade ago. The man in the photo, well dressed, and on his right wrist, the faint scar the elderly man described. Shadow gave a slight smile. "So we meet again, don't we, teacher?" That night, Shadow sat in his room, sketching the entire map onto the wall. Circle 0 Palin, the Wando, the examiner, the man in the photo, art teacher / designer of the box, victims, those who failed the test. Sachaira, the only one the ring rejected, himself, the one still alive, but unaware of why he had been chosen. In his hand was the ring, the one he had kept since the day Lena died. He had never worn it, but tonight he would. Not to wait for answers, but to let them know he was ready to see. The silence that listens. He once wore a police uniform. He once carried a gun. He once believed in evidence and logic. But tonight he wore the ring, the same one stained with his wife's blood. The ring he had kept hid in a wooden box under his bed, never once daring to open it. But when he slipped it onto his finger, nothing happened. No hallucinations, no whispers, no shadows creeping past, only silence, deep and empty enough to feel as if someone were quietly listening. Shadow sat motionless before the mirror, studying his own reflection beneath the dim orange light of the room. He raised his hand, palm up, showing the ring, and softly asked himself, "Are you watching?" At the same time, the CCTV camera outside his apartment, which had always been pointed toward the alley across the street, suddenly turned toward his room. No one controlled it. The following morning, an envelope was slipped under his door, plain white, with no name, no stamp. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. "You shouldn't have worn it, but because you chose, you will be found before you find anyone." Shadow wasn't startled. He gave a faint smile. Finally, they are starting to move. He began planning, ready to flip the game, to draw the figure behind the curtain into the light. He sat at his desk, pulled out the files of all the victims once more, arranged the photos by year, by location, by the characteristics of the boxes they received. And then he noticed something. Every black wooden box bore hidden markings, not on the lid, but on the inside corner, only visible if pried open. He zoomed in on each old photo, inspecting those tiny corners. Each began with K, followed by numbers: K143, K187, K211, and his wife Lena's box, K no box 0. Shadow immediately realized perhaps his wife wasn't just a victim, but the origin point of the selection generation, and he himself wasn't just the survivor, he was the variable that hadn't yet been resolved. He set his trap. He sent a message to a secret account he'd once found in Wada's records, an account used to send files to elite clients. He sent a photo of the diamond with a single message. Que remain, Eribaton remains incomplete. Will you come? Less than 2 hours later, he received a reply. No name, no words, just one set of coordinates. 14.006, 100.511. He pinned the location on the map. It pointed to an abandoned building in Bangsu, an old printing factory closed for nearly 2 decades. No lease records, no new owners, but within the radius where every examiner had once operated. Before leaving his room, he removed the ring, set it down on the table, re-grabbed his film camera and the photo of Circle Zero, and slipped them into his bag. He wasn't going to return the ring. He was going to ask a question no one had ever dared to ask the Watcher. The shadow appears in the silence. That stifling afternoon, with the heat hanging heavy in the air, Shadow navigated a narrow alley that wasn't even marked on the main map. The coordinates he received pointed him to a 3-story concrete building, its outer walls covered in withered vines, and a faded sign barely legible, Dara Techniques Printing House. There were no sounds of machinery, no shadows of people, not even a trace that anyone had lived there for decades. But one wooden door was left slightly ajar, as though someone had been waiting for him. Shadow stepped inside cautiously. Every footfall echoed with a brittle crunch against the wooden floorboards. The faint scent of printing ink mixed with the stale dust of a place long frozen in time. In the center of the white hall stood a lone metal table, and on that table was only one thing, a black wooden box. No ribbon, no message, no diamond, just a box, its lid left open, waiting. He approached slowly, stood before the table and spoke to the emptiness. You called me here for what? No answer, no voices, no shadows of anyone else in the abandoned building. But then the lights flicked briefly and came back on, followed by a projection appearing on the wall ahead. An old-fashioned projector, not high-tech, but a film reel spun by a creaky motor, as though prepared in advance. The first image was an overhead shot of Shadow himself as he crossed a pedestrian bridge 5 days ago. The second showed him standing in front of the bathroom at the cafe with Sochada. The third, him sitting alone in his apartment at 3 a.m., gazing at the ring in his hand where no one else should have been watching. The fourth was his desk from the night before, and the final image, his face staring directly at the camera as if knowing exactly who was watching. The projector stopped with no explanation. From the shadows behind the table, a soft voice emerged, a voice Shadow could never forget. The voice of the art teacher from the old school, the man who had no name in the records, no official past, and no reflection in any photographs. He stepped slowly out of the darkness. His hair was lightly graying, thick glasses framed sharp eyes, one hand gloved in black leather, and on his right wrist, a faint scar like a thin cut. You want to know why you're still alive? He said, not meeting Shadow's gaze directly. Because you don't understand yet. You've been part of this experiment from before you even realized it. Shadow responded immediately. I'm not a victim. No, the man replied. You are the answer to the Zero Generation trial. He explained. The diamond rings that appeared in each case were not cursed. They had no supernatural powers, no demons, no trick mirrors. They were simply ordinary objects. What made them special was the process of selecting who would receive them and observing what happened afterward. The experiment began with a girl, Palin, a child who had always watched the world from unseen corners. She observed people through their shadows, studying how they responded to silence, emptiness, and uncertainty. When she grew up, she used images, objects, and arrangements to test who would see something in what appeared to be nothing. The first diamond was a white gem given to her by her father before he died. She didn't wear it, but passed it to a woman who had once cared for her like a mother. Soon after, that woman died, not because of the ring, but because she saw something in Palin's eyes and accepted it without realizing it. That was the start of Sequel Zero. The man before Shadow revealed that he wasn't the one who designed the system. He was the one Palin had chosen to observe in her place. He traveled, watched lives, followed victims, and when he saw someone ready to see, he staged a small scene, placed the box, and waited for the system to take over. Most didn't pass, because not everyone could handle what they saw. Some only saw the void and were consumed by fear. Some thought they were being tricked and died. Some smiled and were swallowed in the stillness of shadows. Shadow listened silently. He understood now. His wife hadn't died because of a curse, but because she saw something in the mirror, something that wasn't her own reflection, and she accepted it peacefully. In that moment, she passed and ceased to exist in the system. And me? Shadow asked. You didn't die because you never chose, the man said. You have the ring, but you never wore it with a calm mind. You wore it with a question, not with an answer. He paused. And that made you the first to become a variable, not a test subject. The lights dimmed gradually in the room, and before he walked away, the man placed a sheet of paper on the table. A single word was written in faded ink. Choose the 15 and you will understand what seeing means. The beginning that no one remembers. A worn train with few passengers departed from the outskirts of Bangkok, passing through grasslands and small rivers, heading toward a province in the central region. The name of the town it approached was hardly spoken of, an ordinary name, simple and unremarkable, lacking any tourist attractions. No one intentionally visited it except for someone who had dreamed of it repeatedly, without knowing whether it truly existed or was just a figment of imagination. He knew of a large Bodhi tree beside a nameless temple. He knew that if he walked deep into the narrow left alley, he would find an old wooden building with stairs leading up to a second floor that had been sealed for years. He arrived in the late afternoon. The sunlight was not harsh but bright enough to make the dust in the air visible. He walked through familiar alleys that strangely felt familiar, as though he had walked them countless times, despite having no clear memories. He stopped in front of a two-story wooden building. The walls were faded and peeling, with a rusted sign hanging out front. He looked up at the old, decaying stairs and carefully climbed them step by step. No one noticed him, no one passed by, not even the usual barking dogs greeted him as they did in every strange alley. The front wooden door was closed but unlocked. He opened it and entered a vacant room. Light streamed through the partially drawn curtains. In the middle of the room stood a table with a familiar wooden box placed atop it. But unlike all the previous boxes, this one was not black. It was a cloudy white color, with dust settled on top and engraved with a single number, 0. He approached slowly, placing his hand on the box. Dust clung to his fingers, but the lid was not tightly sealed. He gently lifted it. Inside, there was no ring, no paper, nothing, only a small mirror, about the size of his palm, lying at the bottom of the box. The mirror was not shiny like an ordinary mirror. It was like the surface of an old well, murky, as though something lay hidden deep within it. He picked up the mirror and looked around the room. The wooden floor beneath him creaked again, but this time, it wasn't the sound of his own footsteps. It was the sound of someone else stepping in. Yet the room was empty. There was no one, no shadows, no figures, only a sound whispered through the chilling air. He glanced down at the mirror in his hand once more. This time in the mirror appeared the face of a young boy. The boy was sitting in the middle of the room, wearing old grey clothes, his head bent, drawing on the wooden floor with an ordinary pencil. Slowly the boy lifted his head and stared directly at him, speaking without a sound, the voice heard only within his mind. "You've come back." The image in the mirror suddenly shifted to his own childhood self. He truly had sat in this room, once drawing pictures alongside a young girl, Pelin. She sat beside him, drawing the same image, laughing and talking, gazing into the reflection of their small mirror. Both had seen something within it, asking themselves the same question. If what we see in the reflection isn't us, then who is it? He stood still, holding his breath, and began to remember. Little by little, memories that had been buried, erased, replaced, made to believe they never existed. But in truth, he had been one of the initiators. The experiment did not begin with the ring, but it had been within him since the day he first saw it. What Palin saw in his reflection was something that should never have been seen. Yet she smiled and said, "If you're not afraid, it won't consume you." That day he ran. She stayed. That day he chose to forget. She chose to stay with it. Today he had returned. He gently placed the mirror back into the box, then walked out of the room without looking back. No sound, no one falling, no one dying. Everything remained still, as though nothing had happened. But in the shadow of the old wooden window behind him, a shadow still stood there, gazing out at the empty street, whispering softly in a voice no one could hear, "Subject 15 is ready. Who's really watching?" The phone fell silent after the short sentence was spoken. "Subject 15 is about to choose you back." He hung up without saying a word, his eyes steady, but his heart thudding violently. The silence in the room seemed to tremble softly, as if whispers drifted beneath every breath he took. He picked up the small mirror from the table, stared at it directly. No fear, no questions. And in his gaze, the reflection looked back with the same pair of eyes. But this time, it smiled at him in a way he had never smiled before. The reflection wasn't just a shadow, it was another version of him. The same man, the same posture, but the eyes. They weren't the eyes of someone who was merely watching. They were the eyes of someone who had known all along. The next day he decided to return to Wadow's old mansion once more. Though it had been sealed off since the last case, he still had the key from the first day of the investigation. He stepped into the old art studio. The faint scent of paint lingered, scraps of paper still scattered on the floor. In the drawer beside the table, he found a folder he had thought was taken away. Inside, there were only numerous drawings, all of him. Drawings from many angles, many moods, many stages of life. Some showed him as a child, some while sleeping, some while smiling into the mirror in his own room. And on the final page, there was one different image, a picture of him handing a ring to someone, the pink diamond ring, and the face of the person receiving it was Pimlada, his own wife. His hand trembled. He stopped reading, but his eyes were drawn to the words written under the picture in Wadow's handwriting. Selector No. 3. Code Clino. Unaware selection/system operates automatically. He held his breath for a moment. He had never chosen anyone, but the system had been operating through him all along. Pimlada hadn't accidentally received the ring. She had received it from him. He was the sender. He was the selector. And all this time, he thought he was searching for the truth. In reality, he had been part of it all along. He was even the third origin of the system without knowing it. Blurry memories began to return. He recalled the time his wife said the ring was in the drawer. Even though he insisted he'd never bought it, he remembered walking past a shop, seeing a ring in the display case, and feeling the urge to buy it. He remembered being a police officer and how he had sneered into certain files, and it was him who had submitted Suchada's name to the unit that tested human behavior. But he hadn't known what he was doing because the system never let him know. He thought he was a victim, but he was the one who kept the game moving, all without realizing it. He collapsed to the floor. His heart felt like it was shattering. Every death he had tried to find answers for, it happened because he was the conduit. Not wearing the ring had never helped, because he had been holding it from the very start. He was merely pretending to be the investigator, but deep down, he was the true selector. His phone rang again. The other end was silent, except for the sound of breathing. And finally, the voice on the line said just one sentence. You already chose subject 15 the moment you looked back into the mirror. He turned to look at the wall mirror. The reflection was no longer a shadow. It was him wearing different clothes, an expressionless face, calm eyes, and a hand gripping the ring tightly, and the lips spoke to him softly, though he never opened his own mouth. Now, I'll choose you. The reflection turned its back. His heartbeat slowed, not from exhaustion, but because inside, everything had grown unnaturally quiet. The shadow in the mirror wasn't just a reflection like every other time. It stared deeper, more intensely, as if it held life. It was him. The vision of himself that had never hesitated and had never tried to escape the system. You think you're searching for the truth? The reflection said clearly, though his own mouth remained closed. The truth is you're not chasing a killer. You're chasing your own shadow, the one you push to walk ahead of you. He sat still on the wooden chair in his room, the voice in his head. becoming the only sound he could hear, not the sound of fear, not the questions of an investigation, but the voice of an understanding he had once denied. He once thought he was the good person trying to stop the killings, but the truth was, he was the one behind every death, by his own hand, even if unintentionally, even if unknowingly. But his ignorance was the very energy that had driven the system all along. When he reflected on every decision he had made, when he had stayed silent upon realizing someone had a ring, when he had avoided asking hard questions to important people, when he had seen something but chose not to speak because it was too frightening. All of it was a choice. He had never escaped the system. He was the one it used to make it seem as if no one was behind it. The reflection in the mirror smiled faintly before speaking again. But you're not the only one like this. There's another person you've never seen clearly, because you've only ever seen him through your own shadow, he murmured from a throat that felt constricted. The answer wasn't spoken aloud. It emerged in the mirror's reflection, the image of a man he'd once seen in a case file. A man who should have died 10 years ago in a basement explosion at the police station. A man who had been an undercover cop in the same team as him and disappeared after the first diamond ring case. His name was Tada, the detective's assistant, his most trusted right-hand man, the one who had helped him collect victim data, who had mapped the connections between the 14 victims who disappeared after the 5-room fire. Back then, everyone thought he was dead, but the image in the mirror revealed the same. But unlike him, he had never run. He began to understand this system had never stopped, because there were two people it had once selected to represent opposing choices. He was the one who chose to stop, but Thada was the one who chose to continue. Thada wasn't a victim. He wasn't a selector. He was the crystallized essence of the system, still alive and about to begin a new cycle. He rose from his chair. His hand gripped the mirror tightly. His heart still beat slowly but steadily. He knew this would never end until he went to face Tada. Not to capture him, not to kill him, but to ask the final question that no one dared to ask the one in the shadow, just like himself. Why are you still here, when you should have died long ago? And that was the chapter he could not write for anyone else. He had to face it himself, the shadow that never disappeared. The sun rose slowly the next morning, or perhaps it was because the shadow had never looked at the sky the same way again since he saw Tada's face reflected back at him in the mirror. The image of a man who should have died, should have been forgotten, but still appeared silently in various cities, as if someone was helping him to still exist. The shadow began to trace back, returning to the old police station in the Nakon district, where he and Tada once worked together on cases in a small room on the 4th floor. The smell of old paper and files that no one had opened for a long time remained the same, only now new stacks of documents were piled on top, making the old files almost unfindable. He requested access to the confidential file room, and Tada's surname reappeared in the database, but not in the deceased section as he had previously. Tada's name was still active, with a record of using his ID number, just 5 days ago. Most notably, it was used to book a hotel room in a riverside area along the Fry River. The shadow went there immediately. It was a mid-range hotel, not luxurious but quiet. The receptionist confirmed that Mr. Thada had checked in under a false name but used a matching ID number. He requested the adjacent room next door. No one knew who he was. No one asked, because his eyes and demeanor left no room for conversation. He entered the next room and waited until the sun set. The shadow remained silent for hours until the door of the next room opened and he heard footsteps of someone walking down to the balcony. He didn't hesitate. He stood up, opened the door, and slowly followed. On the balcony, he saw the back of a man in a light gray shirt, neatly trimmed hair, with a faint scar from an old explosion in the middle of his back. The shadow called his name unintentionally. Tata. The man slowly turned around. Those eyes were his own, but not the eyes that once hesitated, not the eyes that once felt guilt. They were the eyes of someone who knew everything and had made a choice. You finally caught up, Tata said with a slight smile, showing no sign of evasion or defensiveness. I thought you'd take less time, he said. The shadow was silent. Why are you dead? Tata chuckled softly. Because I chose to live. The shadow frowned. On the day the station burned, I saw you in the basement. I called you out, but you didn't respond. Yes, I was there, Tara replied, but in that moment I saw something in the fire reflected in the mirror. I saw myself in a way I had never accepted before, and I knew I didn't want to come out the same. I let you think I was dead, he continued, and began doing things the system never would. The shadow held his breath for a moment. You chose to change the system? No, Tara answered. He stepped closer, looking the shadow straight in the eyes, and spoke a sentence more piercing than any wound. I'm not your shadow. You are mine. In that moment, the shadow understood. This entire game wasn't just between him and Circle Zero. It was a reflection between him and Tahada, two people from the same origin, seeing the same things, knowing the same truths, but choosing different sides. Tara chose to control the shadow. The shadow chose to cast it out. But while the shadow hoped to stop it, Tada released it and learned how to live with it. Tada handed him something, a black wooden box that once belonged to the first victim, but now there was no diamond, only a mirror with an inscription on the back. Face your own shadow before it becomes someone else. The final light in the shadow. The shadow stood on the rooftop of an old building under a starless night, with only the dim street lights reflecting enough light to see the face of the man before him. Tada, who should have died but still stood before him as the bearer of light from the shadow. The shadow tightly gripped the black wooden box, looking into the mirror inside. What reflected was no longer himself, but all the people who had died. Pimlade, Sochade, the nameless girl in the photograph, and everyone he had watched unknowingly. They were looking back with eyes that held no blame. Why are you still here? The shadow asked softly. Tada looked up at the sky. took a deep breath, and spoke slowly, because I know this system will never stop until someone understands it entirely, without trying to destroy it. The diamond we call a curse never killed anyone. What kills is the fear of seeing one's true self. Everyone who died didn't die because of the ring. They died because they couldn't accept what they saw in the shadow. But I'm not afraid, and that's what kept me alive. A shadow stood still, barely breathing, before asking, "Then why does this system exist in the first place?" Thaya turned back to look him in the eyes, his voice calm but deep enough to be etched in memory forever. Because all people are running from themselves. The diamond isn't a screening tool, it's a mirror. It doesn't kill anyone, it only reflects the truth that no one dares to see. And this world needs someone brave enough to force them to face it, not to eliminate them, but to let them choose whether to continue or exit. The shadow felt as if his entire being was being peeled away layer by layer. He thought he was stopping the cycle of killing, but in truth, he had been part of a system that helped people through it without ever realizing. The shadow walked up to Thada, took out the wooden box, placed it on the ground, and handed the pink diamond ring to Thada, then ended, "By making me the last." Thada smiled without speaking. He picked up the ring, looked at it silently, before gently placing it back into the shadow's hand. "No, you're not a victim. You're the mirror. And this world still has many who need to face themselves." The sound of wind waves hit the rooftop. In that moment, everything seemed still. Thada stepped back 2 steps before speaking the final sentence, both simple and deeply stirring. "You weren't searching for a killer's shadow. You were searching for the part you never accepted as yourself, and now you found it." Thada turned away, walking off the rooftop without looking back, leaving the shadow standing alone with the wooden box and mirror in hand. Inside the mirror, the shadow of himself smiled. Not like Thada's smile,